Each panelist will have 30 seconds to define a buzzword we're currently using in the media industry. So, Daniel, I'm going to pick on you to start with the word millennials.
Okay, so I guess there's millennials, some people call it Generation Y. I'd call it Generation Sensible, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I just think it's a generation that's grown up without any of the certainties that, say, I had when I was born in 1980, so I guess I'm the crossover point. But I knew that there was some pretty decent jobs available to me when I graduated from university, so I could kind of like kick back, relax, and enjoy myself there. Whereas now it's a case of there aren't any certainties. You have to put yourself out there. You have to be entrepreneurial, and I guess it's also the generation that can never really disconnect from the digital world. And I think we certainly did a series of online bullying when I was at Radio 1. Well, still at Radio 1. When you're a kid, when you were 17 odd, when you were at high school in the 90s, you could go home and be cushioned in your own kind of environment, safety. And now it's the case you can never switch off. You can never, disconnect from a constant stream of having to show who you are, having to prove yourself. So I think it's a generation that is forced to be insensible. It's a generation that's under a lot of pressure to constantly impress.
Thank you. David?
Yes.
Engagement.
Oh, this is a beast, this one, when I saw this.
Did she give it to you, or did you choose it?
I wish I chose it, yeah. No, I didn't wish I chose it. The thing is, one thing you're going to hear tonight is lots of buzzwords, and you should probably have a massive button up there just to press every time we do say something. Yeah. Because, unfortunately, that's the world that we work in. Engagement is one of those, and everyone in this room will have their own way of telling a story about how they feel that they're going to be engaged by either another person, a brand, or even a piece of content. The best way to say is it's about telling stories and creating some sort of form of conversation between whatever it is that's trying to communicate with you. Engagement is just another one of those words in the industry about bringing two forms together. It's just a question of how long. Now you're not watching 10 minutes of content and being engaged. You're watching 5 seconds of content on Snapchat and still being engaged. But you will all have your own versions of what you think engagement really is. We'll talk about it more later.
Adam, big data.
Big data.
Big data.
Anyone know what big data is? What's that? Oh, okay. Well, you should be sitting down here then. A really interesting buzzword, or two buzzwords, that I think has a number of fascinating aspects to it. There's no doubt that data has changed organisations, particularly in the media world. When I started in media, there was certainly in the newspaper market when I started, there was no news until the product came out at the morning, because you couldn't see information because we controlled the means of distribution. Digital changed all of that. Go all the way through to now my shopping experience on Amazon is going to be different to yours because they understand enough about me to personalise the experience. Move on again from that and talk about artificial intelligence and the way that big data is at the heart of machine learning, which is going to change our worlds, I think, incredibly over the next 10 to 20 years. And big data encapsulates all of that. So we go from privacy and security and concerns to, I think it was today that MIT announced that they can now predict 85% of all cyber attacks, looking at 3.4 billion data points a day, which again is an incredible piece of technology. So it is changing businesses. It changes the sort of people you need to hire. The way you run your organisations is very different because of it. And for me, it's the sort of canvas for creativity for modern business, and it's super important.
And finally, Mark, programmatic.
Okay, so programmatic, it's the end of all jobs in media buying, right? Lucky you lot. It's not that at all. It is an automated way of buying advertising inventory at scale and at the lowest possible price. So they're the two big benefits. There are two myths about programmatic. One is that it's going to be the end of all humans working in media buying. I don't believe that's going to be true. The other one is that you can press the go button on the machine and you can then put your feet back on the desk and just sit and watch the machine do what it does. Both of those are untrue. I think the truths are you always need smart people to run smart machines. That's not going to go away. And I've seen myself and I've seen other companies, this is the case, that you just cannot sit back and let that machine work on its own. There are constant optimizations. programmatic should be one part of your overall media strategy. It works very well for us at The Economist, but it is not what everyone suggests, in my opinion, the end of media buying for humans. So you guys don't need to worry.
Thank you. The first topic I'd like the panel to discuss is the consumer journey and how that's evolved with digital. And since we're talking about the consumer, I'd like to turn to the audience. And just with a show of hands, how many people today have shared a piece of content, may it be a picture, an article, or a video of some sort on any type of digital platform? Yeah, I mean...
Where have the rest of you been? You need to get out more.
And I'm going to reverse that as well. So how many of you have consumed a piece of content that was either directly sent to you or that you stumbled upon some type of newsfeed, Facebook newsfeed, your Instagram feed? It's not surprising, but it's to prove the point that this consumer journey has changed from this linear framework to more of a circular one, where not only are we more empowered as an audience, but it means that we are getting information not only from brands, but also from our friends and our family. How do you compete today for the consumer's attention?
Have a reason to exist. And I think, the biggest thing with Radio 1 is we're having to shift ourselves away from being your linear radio station. This was some data from 2014, that 1 in 7 under 15-year-olds had a radio set, 1 in 3 had a tablet, and pretty much all of them had a smartphone. So we can't just be a radio station anymore. However, what we can be is a curator of amazing content. I think we kind of joke outside before that in terms of music at the moment, if you go on Spotify, you can be drowning in a sea of average music, but who do you trust to bring you the best? And at Radio 1 we have probably some of the UK's best curators in terms of those that can select the best songs and kind of present them to the audience. So in terms of a curator and someone that can excite, we still have a very strong reason to exist. And so I think it's about redefining who you are as a company. Another example would be, or someone that failed at doing was Polaroid. Polaroid was, you could say, were all about the instantaneous moment of creating a photo, but what they aligned themselves to was the physical camera, and they collapsed.
I think you're absolutely right. I think my experience of The Guardian showed me that if you have to make the news, it's not good enough just to report the news, because the news is everywhere. So you've either got to be the originator, whether that's in the music industry, the struggle the labels have had to try and re-establish their role now, to a news organisation, and then also your point I think is really right about the trust and the curation, because presenting facts, lots of stories but fewer facts. It's, the Economist, the people that have been doing that for many, many years, and that heritage is really, really important. But we're all competing for time. The problem is there's many more demands on people's time, isn't there? And there's lots of competition because of it.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, do you mind?
No.
You want to go? No, you go.
Sorry.
You go.
There you go. I'd also, I'd argue the journey hasn't changed actually. I think what digital marketing has done though is given you more access to data that shows you where people are in a customer journey. And I think people therefore expect you to respect that and serve them content that is applicable to where they are in the journey. So take what we do at The Economist. If we know somebody has maybe visited our website once, we can now see that. We've got dashboards that show us that. It's completely irrelevant and useless to you if I send you a subscription ad at that point in time that offers you a subscription for £150. You can look at that and say, well, I've looked at your content once, I'm not going to pay that amount of money. So we treat you with respect, we send you relevant content that's useful for you. We'll spend more time warming you up. So we'll say, okay, we saw you read a content about politics, let's send you another ad unit in our as part of our marketing mix, but it'll be another piece of content, and it'll either be more politics if we think that depth is something that's of interest to you, or we might give you some breadth. So we might show you something about economics to show you that The Economist is about more than just politics. And as we see you move down this customer journey, we'll fire content that is relevant to where we see you are, so that at the point at which we see you tipping into the point where we think you'll part with some money, it is of course then relevant for us to hit you with a subscription ad and move you over. So I suggest we've always done that. All we've now got is more detail to be able to show you, or to show us where you are in that journey and treat you with respect and give you useful content.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think there's a number of factors from all three of those points is that whatever communication strategy any brand or anyone that's trying to reach out to you has, they have to be genuine in what they're trying to tell you from a story perspective. And they have to be authentic about it, because most of you in this room are pretty untrustworthy until you get something of intrinsic value back, right? Something that is a utility that you can take away and go, I need it, I want it, and I want to share it. And it could be informational, it could be just something that is nostalgic that you remember, or it could actually be something that you just want to tell the world, I found this first. But it goes back to being personal, because there's nothing worse than being communicated to and feeling just like a number rather than an individual. And that's one of the biggest challenges that brands have right now, is trying to understand everything that they can about you. It goes back to the data point, is what is it that you want, and then what are they can they give back to you?
Yeah, just to stress on the point of content, the importance of content has never been as important as it is today. And BuzzFeed was someone who, it's a company that you share so much of its content, but also you view it. What makes BuzzFeed's content so shareable? I know you touched upon some of the points there, but what is it that makes it so shareable?
Well, there's a number of factors, because they tap in, it's like lots of companies now will say they're a tech company first. And invariably what happens is, and it's the same with BuzzFeed, they've been amalgamating data on every piece of content that's ever been shared. So even if it's branded or just editorial, so for 10 years worth of data, they're looking at every piece, and then they analyze that data and then work out why. And so they have a number of fundamental pillars, and both their church and state content, so editorial and commercial, will look at producing something that they know has a share rank value. So they'll say, okay, we're going to create something that has an emotional element. That's why lots of you in here love seeing cats being sick on a carpet, or twerking, or
what's wrong with you?
Animated GIFs of cats and dogs seem to do so well. Yeah, that's a good point. What is wrong with them? And then all of a sudden you'll start to see this other stuff. So one, it may make you laugh, it may make you cry. It actually may empower you. I mean, some of the best shit. I was meeting some of the Unilad and the Lad Bible teams recently, and they said actually that the most popular shared piece of content, and this is on the Lad Bible site in the last 6 weeks, was a piece of content that was talking about Brexit. And the reason why is because they broke it down and talked into plain English to you, to your age group, rather than the crap and the multitude of faces that were talking about it from I think they hit something like 2.5 million streams in a space of 2 days, and yet the actual official campaign for Brexit hit 19,000 impressions in 2 months. So it's the way that you break that down and communicate, and I think that BuzzFeed's just been very clever about that. The second piece, to answer your question about that, is they don't care where their content lives. So it means is you can take it and do whatever the fuck you like with it, all right? You can share it on any of your platforms, because they don't care. All they want you to do is take it and make it breathe and make it travel. And so it's all about where people live and breathe on their content and their devices.
It is interesting though that they hired Janine Gibson, who I worked with for many years at The Guardian, who's a brilliant Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, to edit it here, to be the European editor. And she brought Stuart, her number 2. So they're cleverly combining all of that data with some brilliant journalists to know how to break stories.
Yeah, I mean, if you may not know this, but the Panorama thing about the kids company was in the BBC and BuzzFeed together. The news about the corrupt police and security guards at Buckingham Palace was so all of a sudden you're seeing these serious journalism coming in and breaking the mold of all the traditional journalists. And actually helping them, because they're producing content, and it's making all the other publishers think harder about what they will do and how they communicate with audiences like you.
In terms of measuring success of content, even at The Economist and at BBC Radio 1, I want to concentrate on that. How do you measure the success of content you roll out? Whether it's long form, your articles, or the short-term campaigns you have, how do you measure the success of those?
I mean, we use content within our external media buying to warm people up to eventually subscribe. So the way or not we measure the success of that content is obviously how many people are reading it. Because what it does, we package up content that we hope people will read, and the sole purpose of that is to give us, in this instance, a cookie. We want you to read it. We want as many people to click as possible, because we get a piece of data on you, and that piece of data that the data that content gives us, we can then do what we talked about before. We can take you on a journey. We can shoot further content on you. So right at the top of the journey, the content is there purely and simply to be clicked on. So it's performance for me either way.
Yeah. I guess at Radio 1, firstly there's which type of platform we're talking about. We have the traditional kind of radio station where it's a case of how many listeners we get into the shows. We have the new iPlayer channel, which is a case of watching on BBC platforms, but then there's also the content that we place on third-party platforms. We have 3 million subscribers to our YouTube channel now. So obviously the stats are important. How many views, how many clicks, how many likes, how many shares a piece of content gets. For traditional radio, it's a case of using radar figures, how many listeners that we get. But I think increasingly so, it's a case of how much that piece of content really fits into a piece of zeitgeist and how much it gets talked about and how much it kind of sets trends and pushes things forward. There was a piece we did, probably about 8 months ago now, which was Greg James in a car with Taylor Swift doing, it was called Carpool Karaoke. Then lo and behold, about a month later, it shows up on a certain James Corden show out in the US. Now, whether there's a direct link there, I don't know, but it's certainly a case that it was a piece of content that set a zeitgeist. So I think there's the stats, there's the figures, there's talkability, and there's also how we influence and how we change other people's content direction. Yeah.
And going on the topic of having different platforms, how do you decide what content to put on each one of those platforms? They're very different. Utilizing each of these platforms is very important. Understanding how to use social media is very important. It's not just I'm going to have a social media account because everyone else has one. Yeah. What is the math behind it? How do you do that? It's just a discussion.
Well, I can talk from a filmmaking point of view because we're having to educate up and coming, inspiring filmmakers and also they're actually, I say that they're educating us as well because they're all very individual in the way that they're producing content and they're producing it on a multitude of platforms. Vertical video is probably the fastest growing format out there. Now, I'll tell you a secret as long as you don't tell anyone else. Everyone thinks it's really difficult to shoot vertical video unless you have a phone, but actually filmmakers with a full-on camera just put 2 pieces of tape on either side of the lens and shoot. That's it. And then they rip the tape off afterwards. But what you're seeing now with content creators, they're contemplating where something will live. So it doesn't matter if it's on TV, through to mobile. They shoot something and they'll chop it up into 50 different versions so that it can live and breathe across all of those platforms. So it's about using the best of their time to create the best amount of content. And most media agencies now are desperate, and most brands are desperate for that. I think one of the things that one of my clients once said to me is, we used to produce 4 pieces of content a year and they used to be TV commercials. Now we want 444 pieces of content a year. And that's where we're at now. It's crazy.
I suppose my experience from the news industry is if you're not designing for mobile first, then at some point you're going to become irrelevant. So that's the big pressure on stories. The beginning, there used to be a beginning, a middle and end in any story. Now it's a constant stream. The information is continuous. Yeah. So how do you display it? How do you understand the difference between someone who's new to a piece of information or an expert? Yeah. Particularly in business journalism like Bloomberg or in general news like The Guardian. So we absolutely we're building products for mobile first, and if it will look all right on the PC screen, then great. But it was a real challenge.
I'd imagine all 4 of us on this panel, in all the other panels that we've done every year for the last 10 years. I know we're old. Well, at least I am. I'm not sure about you boys. On that, but I bet every year for the last 10 years we've been saying this is the year of mobile. Guess what? It is the year of mobile.
I was actually going to ask a question about that, but it is the year of mobile. So.
It is. While they exist. You won't need one at some point because it'll be stitched into your clothing, your eyeballs and your glasses. So it's just a moment in time, I think, personally. But
Mark, just about the different types of content onto different platforms, because The Economist is obviously known for their long articles, but you have videos, you have your Twitter account. How do you decide that as well? What type of content are you producing to stay relevant within these different platforms?
So it's about being contextual, that's right, but it's also about the audience and knowing who is on those different platforms. So we know, let's take the younger audience and the commuter audience. We know that they're time poor, we know they only have time in the mornings to commute and the evenings to read anything of any value. We've therefore just launched a new app called Espresso, which is created purely for that kind of generation. Rather than being long form content, it is 5 very short articles every day, 200 words, no more than that. So it's economist content, traditional economist content, which is drilled down into a short form and is taking consideration of, and this is the key point, who is the audience who is going to consume that content, where are they, and how can you make that content fit into their normal life and will be useful in where, the time of day and where you were trying to hit them. Yeah. So you've got to think of all these things together, but I think that the starting point is always, who is the audience that you're trying to hit? And often, what is the business problem that you're trying to solve? So, in the case of The Economist, we have 2 problems. We have misperceptions that The Economist is just about economics. I mean, the name of the magazine doesn't help, but there you go. And there's a misperception that all of the content is long form, and therefore we go out of our way right now to be producing content and getting ourselves live on platforms that try and solve those 2 business problems. Espresso is a great example of that. They think all of our content is long form. We will produce short form content to prove that isn't the case. Everyone thinks our content is just economics. The ad units that we put out and the content that we try and get live on Facebook and Twitter is not just economics now. We talk politics, science, technology, and it's doing more than telling a brand message. It's actually proving it to people. It's one thing me saying to you, The Economist is about more than just economics, please go and read it. I actually put my money where my mouth is, and I'm producing content and showing you content and showing you that is the case. That's the most important.
That's another reason why weekends are still the highest selling days for national newspapers, because the packaging of magazines, guides, travel sections is the time the audience has a bit more rest. So that's the great, whereas newspapers Monday to Friday will die at some point. They won't exist because they're just not economically unviable. But the weekend will still have a role for that exact reason. It's audiences.
I think the biggest thing for us is just understanding how people use platforms. I mean, talk about the radio as the first instance. You have time when you listen to the radio. You're either doing a piece of work, you're kicking back, and so you have the time to spend and build a story over the course of a day. Scott Mills is very famous for pushing to things later in his shows. Whereas if you're YouTube surfing, we have to produce a piece of content that is really applicable to that period of time. A great example recently, we did some pieces with the 1975. We did a full gig with them, and then we did a really simple thing. It was called the school pickup, where Matty from the 1975 goes and picks up some kids from schools with their parents' consent, obviously. And it was just a case of those guys got to interview him in the back of the car, and that did 3 times more views than the gig did. Because when you go to YouTube, you're not going to immerse yourself in a concert. You're going to go there and just enjoy a 10-minute lulls. Whereas if you want to see the appointment of view, a full live show from the 1975, we'll find an iPlayer is a suitable thing for that, because you're making the time in the evening to see that show. So it's about making content for the right format depending on behaviours that you'd use on that platform.
I want to go back to data. I know we talked about big data at the beginning. How are brands and how are you leveraging the internal data to create campaigns these days? How are you using data to prove campaigns, to give a reason to why you're going with this campaign?
Well, I mean, where I'm at now, we partner with a company called Unruly, and they've been doing something very similar to BuzzFeed as well, where they analyse where that content goes, where it travels to. And I think invariably, if content and brands are going to succeed in the future, rather than guessing. I was at an event today with Spotify, and there was a creative director at a company, and he was talking about a TV commercial and around the music that was put alongside TV commercials. And he was asked a question about how important is the music behind the TV commercial, and 2, how do you decide what music's going to be attached to it? Now, the answer that made me chuckle a little bit was he just said it's a gut instinct from the guy that chooses the music, and I don't believe that at all. I think it was utter bollocks. Right? It wasn't a creative decision. It was about the science of them testing and analysing the content alongside the piece of music, blending the 2 together, and making sure with a test audience of thousands, no doubt, to make sure that actually was going to work. And what happens now with lots of companies from a branded content point of view is they're testing the water. They're pre-producing a short, cut-down version of something and sticking it out into the environment, and they're doing something called test and learn. So you'll hear this a lot in the next few years. Every brand wants to test and learn. They go out there, create a piece of content, see how well it performs, then it evolves and it iterates, and they go again. And they start to produce for every platform, and they'll test and learn, evolve and iterate. And that's the way that those companies are working from a social sharing point of view, is they know what kind of content travels.
Going on test and learn, a lot of companies are now taking risks with digital. Are there any risks that you have taken and that weren't so successful?
That we're willing to share with you.
That you're willing to share, and what you have learned from it. Maybe don't share and just tell us what you've learned from these risks.
I'll tell you one. I once put a camera that was a fisheye lens that took pictures every 15 seconds and tied it to the neck of a Chinese security guard's Alsatian dog and let it go, hoping to get the content back in a time lapse later on in the day. And I nearly got arrested and thrown in prison for it.
I think, having said that, on the test and learn and the data model, I think there is a watch out on there, though, that you don't fall into the echo chamber model of only giving people what they already like, because then there's no new experience. And I think it's very important that media channels still take risks and take the lead in setting trends. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very, very vanilla landscape in terms of content.
You've got the whole behavioural targeting phenomenon, which is exactly that. You know, you've bought the pair of shoes. I know I've got data that says you were on that e-commerce environment. I'm now going to hound you around the internet showing you adverts for shoes. Now, I ran an ad blocking startup in between The Guardian and Bloomberg, and behavioural targeting shot blocking numbers up. Christmas, the month of December, is the highest install rate for ad blocker, and it's the time the advertising community thinks it's the most sophisticated. And it just pisses people off, which is that whole point. Yeah. You've misunderstood the signals.
Yeah, it's like searching for a pair of slippers for your granddad, and then 2 weeks later you're still getting ads for slippers on Amazon.
There's a big watch out with data as well. The one thing we've found is you can now track everything. Like, there are more KPIs than you can throw a stick at. There's CPC, there's CPL, the list is endless. And the real trick with data to make smart business decisions is understanding what you're trying to achieve and understanding the best metric that you can optimize a campaign to hit the goal you're trying to hit. Because the opposite side of data is, if you use too much of it, or you use the wrong KPI and optimize the campaign to the wrong thing, it can actually massively work against you. So it's kind of ironic that you have more visibility now of data than ever before, and you think that is always helpful.
Yeah.
But data in the wrong hands
dangerous.
Is very dangerous.
I think data without experience is the biggest problem. Before I worked at Radio 1, I used to work for Red Bull, and that was a company that had no KPIs at all, had no data. It was just, you who works for us, you know you're seen, do something cool, and off we went and did it. And sometimes it would flop massively, but sometimes it would just get it absolutely right, because the data we were using was years of experience built up by people in that scene. So none of the marketers at Red Bull were qualified marketers. You know, my background was in music. The sports guy was a snowboarder, but he knew what made snowboarders tick. I knew what made musicians tick. So I could create campaigns based on that for the inside knowledge of the scene, and then that would flourish. Now, obviously, Red Bull's a very specialist brand, or was back then. But I think it's fine to have data as long as you know how to apply that, and I think it's experience that allows you to apply the data that you're having coming in.
I just think, back to your question as well, I think that one of the biggest changes for business is the level of transparency that now exists in life. You know, you used to be able to make claims as a business and get away with it, whether it was the quality of your products, your value chain, service levels, whatever it was. Now there's nowhere to hide. You know, the world's flat now anyway. It's on a digital screen, and people share information. So that's transformative for lots of organisations. Both, it's really difficult to deal with it because you don't often know how to handle some of that. It's always in the public domain. So the old rules around public relations and communication strategies are hard because it's happening now and it gathers momentum, and then the media pick it up and amplify it. You know, you see this all the time. So if you make a mistake, it's quite hard to recover from now. Which is a good thing because it holds them to account.
And speaking of internally, having everyone, like you were saying, being involved in a campaign, all companies now have the technology to be digital in their own way, but it's really about a cultural change in a company. How are things changed at Bloomberg, at BBC, Radio 1, or at The Economist culturally? The Smalls is fundamentally a very digital company, but how has that changed to become digital leaders as well?
I'll say for the staff that we hire, we now hire on different parameters. So something that is very important to us is people's ability to handle change. Mm-hmm. It happens nearly every week of the month where you'll think you've just cracked an algorithm. You'll think, wow, I've cracked that Facebook algorithm, and then Facebook will launch a new product, and the thing you've just learned you think you've just mastered is no longer relevant, and the half-life of these products is so quick these days that recruiting people who are willing to go with the flow, willing to change is incredibly important for us now as marketing directors.
I think I pretty much completely agree with what you're saying there. You go back 15 years, you look at Radio 1 staff, you had radio producers, you had assistant radio producers, you might have a marketing team, you had the ops team, and that was it. And now you walk through the doors, you have the social media producers, you have the visual radio team that do the stuff for YouTube, that do the stuff for iPlayer. And now it's increasingly moving towards that the junior staff that are coming on board need to have the ability to do all of these things and then move between the teams. So it really is about skilling up the company to be able to survive in that environment.
Oh yeah, I'm just probably going to echo. I've done 2 major digital transformations. One at The Guardian, which sadly meant hundreds of people lost their jobs on the way through, because there is a point. Most digital companies are much smaller than most traditional companies, so there is just a pain point. And I'm afraid there's nothing like pain to cause change, because it makes everyone look up and go, fuck. And if you denied it before it hurt, it's impossible to deny when it does hurt. So we were going to go bust at The Guardian if we hadn't reorganised it, and no one wanted to do that. It's a 150-year-old business. It's all about people, ultimately. Business is about people. So you want people on the journey. If they want to come with you, then you do everything you can to help them. You train them, you reward them. If they don't want to come, they go. Yeah, and that's the harshness. And I saw that. Bloomberg is an incredibly dynamic organisation. 15,000 people, digital from day one. An amazing organisation, but brutal in its delivery. If you don't swim, you drown.
Yeah. I think businesses, and from my experience also, the likes of Microsoft, is they were trying to find people that were transformational, trying to find hybrids or butterflies. They could morph into something else. They could become something else, so they could easily learn and adapt. And most businesses, it can't just stay this. You can't do like this massive ship that's heading in one direction. They need to turn quickly, because the competition is so much fiercer now. There's new companies and business. The companies that are doing well at the moment, in the next 6 months, you're going to see 2 or 3 brands that pop out of nowhere that will be the next generation of new content creators that we'll be talking about. And what they're doing is pushing hard on those companies that have been quite traditional in the way that they created stuff. And that's healthy though.
Well, what I find really interesting at the new business Freeformers is it manages the people side of digital transformation. So lots of companies they'll do lots of spreadsheets, lots of change plans, lots of cost cutting, but actually they forget often about the survivors, the people who are left doing the day job, which are still really, really important. So we're spending more time training shop floor staff in John Lewis or Barclays branches, for example, whose job it is now to talk to their customers about their digital apps. Now, I work on the shop floor in a branch, and I'm essentially saying to you, there's an app that does what I do. Now, that's not the easiest thing to get me to want to do. So you've got to really help me understand why that's beneficial to my customers and what it means for me, and how actually I need digital confidence in my life, full stop. And actually, this app doesn't work very well. So a lot of Barclays staff now tell head office how to improve their apps, because they're the ones using them. Yeah. So a lot of it is around psychology and people.
And just for our audience tonight, since a lot of them are students, what advice would you give them if they wanted to get into the media industry today?
Well, I think
where do we start?
Yeah. Well, I think you have, as we talked about at the beginning, we could rock up and go, do you know what, I'd like to work in media. Interview a bit, get a job. I didn't know what it was. It just, it was what you did. Now, we would never hire anyone who, if you want to be a journalist and you're not creating, you're not writing, you're not blogging, then you're not a journalist. And it doesn't matter what university you went to.
Yeah.
And that is another big issue, which I should be careful in Imperial. There is a flatlining. The world is global, so there's talent everywhere. And actually, companies are working much harder to find talent that hasn't gone through university now, because you want creators, you want creative talent. We've just hired an amazing 25-year-old guy to come and run this digital agency with Dentsu. Spent 5 years living on the streets of London. He's one of the best filmmakers I've ever seen. So it is a difficult world out there. So you've got to be creating. You've got to live what you say, not just say it.
It's fierce out there, without a doubt. But it was fierce in our day as well, right? But the thing is, I would say, is you have a better opportunity if you have passion points about what you really love doing. You can follow it. It's easier to do it. It's easier to learn. It's easier to coach yourself. It's easier to train yourself. You can find people that are willing to help you. I was always told, people used to say to me, nobody likes the sound of their own voice as much as you do. And I used to get that a lot, because I talk a lot, right? And the reason why is because I like to ask lots of questions. The more questions you ask, the more knowledgeable you will become. So never ever be ashamed or afraid to ask questions, because that's the bit. It's like this learning process of you getting better at what it is you want to do. So sometimes you do have to follow the dream, but you're not always going to make it.
I think have ideas, prove yourself, give a shit. And they're the main things. If someone comes to an interview with me and they're lackluster, you can tell there's no passion there. Of course, you're not going to take them on. But equally, touching on your point there, it is so much easier now to make stuff. When I'm probably a little younger than you guys maybe, but even when I was there, you couldn't just create a piece of video content without getting a camera, cutting, splicing, etc., etc. Because you couldn't do that on a Commodore Amiga. Yeah. Now you can go out, you can make video content. One of those is, by the way. Now you can go out, you can make video content. You can, a band that's making a music video, just call up their mate and they can make something for 40 quid. Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that you can bring along to an interview. So it's take advantage of technology that you have now and create the stuff to bring through.
That point around, it used to be about big companies. And actually now, there's so many more opportunities in smaller digital businesses, particularly. Have you seen have you any of you spent any time on Fiverr? Used it at all? Yeah. It's just a phenomenal flatlining business that allows any creative talent to connect with a global audience. So I look at there are so many grads on there who have a specialist skill, whether design or movie making, and they're working. Yeah. They're working for themselves through platforms. You used to have to go and work at a studio.
Yeah, I mean,
get employed by somebody else. You don't have to do that now.
So I'll give you an example. The new Hail Caesar, George Clooney film that's out at the moment. Anyone can sign up to be a part of our community and be a filmmaker. And Christ, we've got people with iPhones, through to loads of kit in there. Some of them are in their back bedrooms, still living with their mums, but they're producing great work. And we put a piece out for Hail Caesar, and two of the animators, they've got their computers, got their kit at home, and they produced it, and they're getting paid for doing great work with great brands. So I think sometimes you just, there are much more opportunities for you to get involved in that.
And I think a lot of that is, it's more than just a job then. Yeah. It's your passion point, and it's what you want to do in life, so you will do it, and it will be easy for you to do it because you want to do it. And it's not a case of doing something to prove yourself for an interview, it's doing something because it comes naturally to you, and I think that's the important thing to have.
And Mark, for those who want to work at The Economist?
I look for three things by the end of the interview. I want someone who's going to be passionate. I want someone who's going to look like they want to learn, and I mean being humble by that as well. I mean, some of us have been around for a while, and we might look old, but if we want to help you to get on. So passionate, look like you want to learn, and look like the type of person who's going to say yes more than you're going to say no. They're really three important skills for us.
One more question before we open the floor up to questions. I know our fellow marketing students will love to hear your favorite digital campaigns, and why they were your favorite. So I'll start with Mark.
Mine was some of you may know this, the BA campaign that was in Piccadilly Circus. Does anyone know that campaign I'm going to talk about?
When the plane flew over, that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was called Fly Away or something. But it was a brilliant use of technology. I mean, this is the way I would describe it. If I was to say to my grandfather, you know what, I was stood in Piccadilly Circus yesterday, and there was a small boy on an ad unit who every so often points up into the air, and at the time he points up into the air, an aeroplane was flying past. And the name of that aeroplane and where it had come from and where it was going was displayed at that exact moment on that billboard. He wouldn't believe me. He'd say that cannot be possible. And they made that happen. It's a really good campaign. It was a Cannes Award winner. Just very, very clever use of all that was good about digital at that point in time, which was 2 years ago. So I'd urge you to go and have a look at that one.
I'm going to stick with the flight industry and talk about a campaign by KLM. What I liked about this was because it combined digital and real-world interaction and a real nice kind of emotional twist to it. So they got these two, if you like, anyone's seen 2001 Space Odyssey? It's like obelisk kind of appeared. There was one in New York, formerly New Amsterdam, and one in Amsterdam. And the idea was you walked up to this panel and you could see whoever was on the other side of the world, either in Amsterdam or New York on that side, and you had to high-five them. And if you managed to get the palm spot on, then a KLM representative would run out from some hidden corner and give you a flight to go to Amsterdam or to go to New York. And it's obviously they recorded this and made a nice bit of digital content around it, and it went super, super viral. But it was just such a simple idea, but it was human. And I think that's the real, it was a real nice story.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of campaigns and they sort of start to all blur into one, but from a category point of view, there's so many out there. I mean, you can just say, right, okay, choose one in automotive, and the Jean-Claude Van Damme stuff with Volvo trucks was one of my favourites because one is and I actually met the team that shot that, and Van Damme is an insane nutcase, right? And he was actually like saying, I can be here all day, so there was no CGI around that. And what you'll find now in lots of content that's created around the world, CGI, green screening is just like, it knock it out, 10 to a dozen, it's just easy. But with that was live, shot multiple times, him doing the splits, and it makes me wince every time I see it, but also it was just a cool piece of content. And people still aren't going to buy Volvo trucks, by the way, but you may contemplate buying a Volvo when you're a little bit older and you've got kids.
Yeah, I drive a Volvo, they're great.
And the other one, sorry, just to say, is that I think it was in the Euros 2 years ago when McDonald's very cleverly on Facebook recreated every goal and every game, every moment in each game with fries in a stadium. Yeah, it's quite clever. You can check it out.
I don't know. To be honest, I suppose I look at moments. So I loved the. I can't remember the brand now. I think was it for Sony TVs when they started, and they used the rushes though. I love that. So the creative was made the colourful balls fell down the street. It was beautiful.
So
but the clever thing was they released earlier. They released the film, so they released it in bits. No, most ad agencies would never release their film. But they put it into YouTube, I think it was, and people made versions of it. It was really clever. So I thought that was a seminal moment. Flash mobbing I thought was a really, really important moment in how you can make something live and interesting that then extends. I'm going to talk, I suppose I'll finish with the Guardian ad because I signed it off, which was the Three Little Pigs, which for us was an amazing moment. The Guardian had done no brand work for 25 years. At the most important point, most painful point of the transition, when we were losing the most amount of money, we invested in our brand, and we made an amazing TV advert, which extended in lots of ways. We retold the Three Little Pigs as if it was a modern news story, including actors wearing pig costumes. Did any of you see it? Fuck, I'll fire that agency. And it was brilliant. It definitely helped transform the brand, and it was really brave. So I think any ads that are brave, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, bravery is a good one.
The team will be posting all these campaigns on the newsletter, so we definitely will see them. Thank you. I'd like to open the floor up to questions now. So if anybody has any questions, yes?
I actually got a question for Mark regarding programmatic. So my company is B2B media size, I would say, and we are trying to do programmatic. I'm just thinking, do you have any suggestion regarding this kind of campaign? This is brand new to us. So should we go for a third-party agency, or should we go for a platform like DoubleClick, like Google, and so on?
It's a good question. We've evolved what we do. We first ran it through an agency, not a specialist agency. We then brought it in-house, and we've now sent it back out to an agency, but a specialist programmatic agency. So I've kind of done all three. I guess the first thing I'd say is it's about scale. So how big is this campaign going to be, and how big a part of your marketing campaign is it going to be? Because if it's a small test, I suggest you give it to a specialist agency to begin with, because they know what they're doing. They'll get it live and they'll know what they need to do to optimise it quickly. I guess as it becomes a bigger part of what you do, you then need to take the decision whether you want to bring it in-house. There are benefits of bringing it in-house. You save on agency commission, you get to internalise all of the skills of programmatic buying into the company itself, which, believe me, is quite an interesting cultural thing to bring into the organisation. So I guess it's about scale. The real trick that we've found with programmatic though is this, and I can only describe it as patience and doing what you wouldn't normally do as a marketer. So marketing students are always told to segment audiences. Make the audience as small as you possibly can and target one person and make it, everything you do, aim it at this one person and they'll convert. Actually, the beauty with programmatic is a machine learns best when it has lots of data points. And therefore, if you keep segmenting audiences and shooting up a campaign with only 10 people, the machine will never learn. So it goes back to scale again. To begin with, choose who your agency is you're either going to do it in-house or with an agency, but turn the machine on to begin with. Don't segment and let it fly for 2 or 3 weeks, but be patient. It will take a bit of time to learn, and then you'll get to a point where you've reached a level. And when you've reached the level, you'll have a line in the sand, and then you can go on from and optimise from there. But it's about patience and scale, I'd say.
Yes?
You made a great point about saying that right now technology allows people to create great content,